Welcome to the Rebel Podcast Adventure Travel Series with Deborah Danielson.
You see me as a monster who haunts your soul and mind. Well, baby, come get lost in my wild and crazy ride.
No one has a definitive answer as to the question of how many people prefer adventure vacations over traditional travel. There is no single definition even of what constitutes an adventure vacation. But travel trends suggest that adventure travel is becoming increasingly popular, particularly among younger generations. So in 2022, a survey was done by the Adventure Travel Trade Association, and they found that 69% of global travelers are interested in adventure travel, and 43% are planning an adventure trip in the next 12 months. The survey also found that millennials, those between the ages of 25 and 40, are the most likely generation to be interested in adventure travel. Another survey found by the travel booking platform Skyscanner found that 59% of global travelers are also looking for more adventurous experiences than they've had in the past. The most popular adventure activities among travelers include hiking, camping, trekking, and sightseeing. The increasing popularity of outdoor activities and the growing availability of affordable adventure travel packages are driving these preferences.
So my name is Shannon Justice. My business is History Walks LLC. I am a cemetery preservationist and history tour guide.
I am so happy to have you here today. One of my most favorite tours I've ever had, I think, is the tour of Fairview Cemetery. It is one of the most outstanding cemeteries I've been to in the world, believe it or not.
Fantastic.
And who would think that on the top of a bluff in Council Bluffs, Iowa, you would find amazing architecture in cemetery terms.
Mm-hmm.
You would find crypts, you would find a Civil War cemetery, and a ton of history.
Absolutely.
And then on top of it, during the pandemic, quite by accident, I discovered this journal, which I'd love to share with you.
I'm so excited to take a look at it.
Because what I found out in here almost took away my breath. I found out that the very cemetery that my grandmother would take me to, and we would have, and she was very Victorian, but it used to be a tradition that, you know, my grandma's generation would have picnics in the cemeteries.
Yes.
And Fairview was a great picnic place.
And still is.
It still is. And the animals love it. There's deer up there, there's turkey, there's fox, there's all kinds of things running around that you can enjoy. But what was amazing to me, I was never taught that a cemetery was a sad place or a scary place or a place of mourning. But I was taught that a cemetery is a place of, well, first of all, history.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, remembering your ancestors and rejoicing and celebrating them, learning all about what did they do and how did they think. But, you know, we're talking today about all kinds of things that happen in this life. And what I read in this journal is how that these children were born during, you know, the late 1800s, early 1900s. And there were these pandemics that went on, not too strange from what's going on today with COVID and whatnot, and how a lot of those little children are buried in unmarked graves.
Yes.
And thankfully, because of one historian and one loyal Council Bluffs retired person, She was able to tell me where these babies are buried, and they have no cemetery headstone marking, and where it just looks like there's a bare curve in the road, that's where these children, and for lack of a better term, I guess I have to say it this way, that's where they're buried, like in a filing cabinet, because literally, because my relatives were not wealthy, they dug a hole, they put Edmund in first, they put the second baby in, they put the third baby in, they put the fourth baby in. So it's my goal to get some money together and to put a headstone there, so that when you go through there and you're giving your wonderful cemetery tours, and I love this, you have this gorgeous brochure, that it's guided history. I love that. History walks.
Yes.
I love that. So when you're giving your tour someday and you go by there, I hope that you can mention these babies so that they'll be remembered. Because, you know, there's nothing more sad to me than having been on the earth, been born, and then there's like no evidence you existed.
Yes.
So tell me about these historic walks you go on. Tell me about any interesting experiences you've had in the cemetery giving these tours.
So the idea behind a guided history tour in a cemetery is to share the stories of the residents of the cemetery, to share the history of the community that the cemetery exists in, and to talk about the funerary art and the culture around the cemeteries, especially in the Midwest. And for me, that's where I'm at. And how they got on top of these wonderful hills with these beautiful views. There's a reason they call it Fairview Cemetery. You have a very fair view of the surroundings.
Beautiful.
You can see the Missouri River Valley in a way that you simply can't capture in another location. And today we can see the beautiful skyline of Omaha, Nebraska within the cemetery bounds. But the Fairview Cemetery, like most pioneer cemeteries, has a very long and storied past. It has spent part of its life being abandoned and neglected, like most pioneer cemeteries.
And it went broke.
It did go broke.
I never realized that a cemetery could go bankrupt.
Yes.
And then I sat there one day when I heard this on the radio, or I heard somebody talking about a newspaper article, and I said, oh my gosh, what happens to the people that are buried there?
Yes.
I really didn't know.
Sure, and you are not alone. Most people don't know much about how a cemetery operates, how it makes its funds, the expenditures that it might have once it's no longer an active burial ground. In the case of Fairview Cemetery, it has become the property of the city of Council Bluffs, Iowa, and it is part of their parks department, which is somewhat common when a city takes over ownership of a burial ground. Generally speaking, it becomes part of their parks department. Like your experience that you were talking about with your grandmother, it used to be extremely common to go into these burial grounds and visit your ancestors and celebrate their lives and learn their stories. And the monuments were placed as a memorial. They were meant to be enjoyed. Those people were meant to be remembered. That's why they put those memorials there.
And they're beautiful. There are some memorials there that look, you know, very Victorian, first of all.
Yes.
The design, but some of them, some of my most favorite actually look like trees.
Yes, those are actually known as tree stones.
Really?
Yes, they were carved intentionally to look like a tree. The first time you see one, it's usually pretty eye-catching, and there are many versions of the tree stones at Fairview Cemetery. The majority of them are made out of limestone. They were carved intricately. But they were also mass produced, and you could order yours out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog.
Oh my God, I never did Well, when I heard that this cemetery had gone broke, I was so concerned that when I was working with the community and we put in the National Register listings on residential neighborhoods, we put in 4. We included the Fairview Cemetery in that.
Very good.
I was just, along with all of the residents of that area, which sits high on a bluff,
Yes.
and it's one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in Council Bluffs, I felt that first of all, there had been some, things going on with demolition or destruction or defamation within the cemetery. And I just felt like we needed to take some action to prevent that going forward. And I will say the city has put up barriers. They have done some really good things. They have also closed off certain parts of the cemetery. But I will say, beside the tree trunks and the tree bench up there that I love, there's very famous people buried in there.
Absolutely.
Like Amelia
Bloomer. Yes, she is buried at Fairview Cemetery. You mentioned the bench, the tree bench.
Yes.
That's actually part of the Marks family plot. So Benjamin Marks is another very famous Council Bluffs resident. He had the Marks Ranch, which was a saloon, and Benjamin, how should I say it? He chose the selection, or he selected the location that he had it built very specifically.
Really?
The Marks Ranch sat on the county line, and half of the building, the north half, was in Pottawatomie County, Iowa, and the south half was in Mills County, Iowa. And he had a gambling house, and so when his patrons were there enjoying the facility, if the law came a knocking, they just went through the door in the middle of the building over to the non-offending county, and they escaped persecution.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding that that worked for many years. The building still stands today, but it is a private residence now.
Wow. Well, the other interesting thing that I love about Fairview Cemetery is the guy that owned the Ocean Wave Saloon is also buried up there.
See, now you're telling me stories I've never heard.
Oh, yes. Well, and it was so raunchy, so notorious back in the day. I guess it just was wreaking havoc on the whole downtown. And what's interesting is the history of Council Bluffs. At that time, we had lots of Pottawatomie Indians. It was the Wild West frontier for anybody coming from the East Coast going out to California or going west. And we had a lot of fur trappers.
Yes.
Fur traders. We had bear, mink. We had all kinds of stuff going on in there. And so there was this whole series of saloons, but the Ocean Wave seemed to stick out as being the bad boy of the group. And what is really hilarious today is that the United Methodist Church is standing on that ground. I guess that when the people of the city got together, they decided, we're not going to have that anymore.
And they
tore it down and put a church up. What's interesting too about the placement of the church being right here, right? The rest of the saloons and all of that are sort of just lined up around that church. So I guess they could repent once they came out. Up at Fairview Cemetery, there are a few crypts.
So we refer to those as mausoleums.
Mausoleums.
And the ones that they have at Fairview Cemetery, the majority that I have seen are in-ground mausoleums.
Yes.
They're not above-ground mausoleums. And they're not unique to this area. Multiple locations chose that way to develop a mausoleum. They're pretty popular. They were extremely popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was a symbol of stature and to show off your wealth in the cemetery.
Yes. What has intrigued me is that there's like a row of those mausoleums.
Yes.
And then it appears on the very end, something occurred because that one's actually closed off. So it's almost like boarded up, if you will.
Yes, and that's actually not uncommon, especially if a family is no longer visiting the burial location, if they've, excuse the term, but if they've died out or if they've moved on and there's no family left in the area, then they will secure the mausoleum so no one is entering it, so they cannot be harmed. You know, you had mentioned previously that you really need to be careful when you're visiting these historic burial grounds. And that's no lie. It can be extremely dangerous. And some folks who are out there just enjoying the green space or the atmosphere of the cemetery they might not realize the danger that lurks there. And they just go for looking for a good time, and they don't necessarily mean to be disrespectful. They're just enjoying the space, and they don't understand the real danger that is there.
And one of the things about the cemetery, the fact that it's sitting way up on this bluff, and this view is fabulous, and the trees, these huge ancient oak trees.
Yes.
All of that actually is part of the danger too.
Absolutely.
Because if you're not paying attention, it's a heck of a first step off of that thing, right?
Oh,
off of that bluff.
Definitely. One of the things that I talk about repeatedly, especially when I give tours of Fairview in October, is watch out for the walnuts. There are multiple walnut trees at Fairview Cemetery. Walnuts are not as small as you might think they are. They get pretty big, and when you walk on them, it's like having really big marbles under your feet.
That's true.
You're walking down a hill, and there's all of these walnuts, and then it's a steep incline and Fairview Cemetery has the deepest, I call them gutters. I'm not sure what their actual term is, but
they are
along
gutters.
The road, they have the deepest gutters I've ever seen in a cemetery, and very good for them. That helps the water drain appropriately.
It does.
But I make jokes when I have folks in the cemetery not to fall in the gutters because you might never get out.
It is dangerous. And the other thing is, when I was up there the other night filming for this segment, there were deer up there.
Oh, yes.
And the deer are in rut.
Yes.
And what I've recently learned is, because my windows are very heavily tinted, that if a deer in rut is around your vehicle and they look and they see themselves because of the tinting, they will charge your vehicle.
Wow.
Yeah. They think you're the enemy, you're the competition. There are things like that you have to be cognizant of, that there are other animals, people, there's geographic things you got to be aware. If you're going to do adventure tour and do adventure traveling, you have to be aware of where you are.
Yes.
To prevent any nasty spills.
Yes.
Or, even when we were up there filming, the very first thing we said was, above all, respect.
Sure. Yes.
We're not going to dishonor anything or anyone because, hey, I've got relatives there.
Sure.
And the number two thing was to appreciate the beauty and all of the time and effort that these pioneers put into making this place.
Yes.
Right? I talk a little bit about, as you go from the main cemetery, there's a long road and it goes over to the Civil War cemetery.
Yes, the Soldier's Circle is how they refer to it.
Okay.
In the center is the Kinsman Memorial for Colonel Kinsman. I'm not quite aware of how that section of the cemetery got sectioned off for military burials. It's not only military burials. There are other individuals buried up on that spot. One of the things about Fairview Cemetery, and it's not specifically unique to Fairview, a lot of pioneer cemeteries have this challenge, is no one's really exactly sure where the original boundaries of the cemetery were.
I believe that.
So,
absolutely.
yeah, Fairview Cemetery Board was officially founded on March 27th, 1864. At that time, they identified 80 acres of land that the cemetery existed upon.
Wow.
Today, if you include all of Fairview Cemetery's burial grounds, together with the Lincoln Memorial and the Ruth Ann Dodge Memorial, you might squeak out 40 acres.
Yeah, it's very small now. It
So-
seems to have shrunk.
There have been stories of when they were building the homes around the cemetery that they either intentionally or unintentionally took over part of the burial ground. Some of the houses that are near the cemetery have grave markers in their yards. They're so close to the cemetery bounds that they have grave markers in their yards.
It's because it's premium property. Let's face it,
Yes.
right? And, you know, here's the thing. Some of those houses up there were built by very wealthy families that were prominent in the community. So I think because of their prominence, because they employed a lot of people, there was goodwill, and there was like, oh, well, you know. But here's the other thing about that Civil War cemetery that just stuck out to me. There are people, soldiers buried there from all over the United States.
Yes, it was very common, especially after the Civil War. There was a great migration. Folks settled in other places. They didn't stay where they were from. Many soldiers became tramps. The term tramp is actually, that's the Americanized version of an English phrase, tramping about, that was given to soldiers after they left their service, and they didn't really necessarily have a home. They didn't have anything to employ them, and they just tramped about the countryside. Civil War soldiers we have buried in this part of the country didn't serve the Iowa, militia or the Nebraska militia.
They did not.
They had served elsewhere.
And, but the cool thing is that they are there and they are buried there. And Lysander Tully is one of the, I think he was a colonel.
Okay.
Or a general. Lysander Tully, he and his wife are buried side by side. And then you have the soldiers right around him.
Yeah.
It's not like he stuck out and was anything unique.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to take a moment. I want to read this to you. And this is from my great aunt, Amelia Victoria Danielson Knott. That's her official name. And she's remembering back to when her parents were first married. I am not sure where their first home was located, but feel sure it was somewhere on Fifth Avenue in the uptown part of Council Bluffs. Money was scarce in these days, and life was a bit difficult for struggling young people. But they managed on what they had and got along okay. They hadn't been married very long before they learned that their first child was soon to be born. And he was born on November 22nd, 1893. He was fine, healthy, a beautiful little fellow, alert, intelligent, and all anyone could ask for in every way. He was named Edmund, and his parents were very proud of him and loved him dearly. But it seems that the Lord had something else for him to do, for he called him home 2 years later on November 8th, 1895. That was such a sad day for our parents. There was a very serious disease among and around in epidemic proportions called membranous croup, but which was no doubt a serious type of diphtheria, where the tonsils swell up until they fill up the throat cavity and were covered with a thick, white, furry mucus, which choked the life out of thousands of children everywhere. Sometimes a slit was cut in the throat so a child could get air. It was a time when doctors didn't have wonderful life-saving medicines and facilities for treating serious illness as they do in our days of the 1980s. This was the dreadful illness that our little brother had contracted, and the doctor told my mother in Dane that little Edmund couldn't live, that he was going to die. Mother said Edmund understood what the doctor said and became so frightened that he ran across the bed and tried to climb the wall to get away from death. But of course, he had to go.
It's truly heartbreaking.
Yes. What's really heartbreaking is at the very next day is what it says here, on November the 9th, 1895, I decided to join my folks in their hour of sorrow. Being a very small 3.5-pound baby.
Wow.
So small that Mother said that it would fit into a cigar box. And she worried for fear I'd get the dreaded disease and go to, and being so small, the exposure to the illness would be pretty dangerous, as there would be little hope of saving a new little baby like that. Again, I managed to live through this very bad period okay, and lived to overcome more dangerous illnesses as well. So here was Edmund, 2 years old, passing away. She was pregnant. She gave birth prematurely. The child caught the same disease. And in a matter of the same 2 days, she lost 2 children.
I think the worst fate anyone can experience is having to bury their child.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, child mortality was extremely high at the time. Of all the children born in 1885, I believe the percentage was 85% of them would not survive to their 10th birthday.
Isn't it tragic?
It really was. And I think we do take for granted how we can treat illnesses. So many epidemics: cholera, diphtheria, whooping cough, the Spanish flu. There are multiple individuals buried at Fairview Cemetery that lost their life to the flu epidemic.
His mother, the one that we're talking about here, you'll see when you read this.
Yes.
She actually succumbed to that.
Oh, my great-great-grandmother succumbed to it as well, and she is buried at Fairview Cemetery.
Wow. Well, my house used to be owned by O.P. Wickham and the DeVole family. And right across the alley is where Amelia Bloomer lived. So up in the cemetery, ironically, they are placed in the same juxtaposed position that they were in life. So the DeVole family is buried right here. There's a brief little road, and then there's Amelia Bloomer. And Amelia Bloomer, who was a huge suffragette.
Yes.
And who, the Bloomers are named after. And she took part in the Lily, and she did all of these things. And the woman who wrote this journal actually went to school at Bloomer School.
Excellent.
It is such a cool story. And when I moved into my house and put it on the National Register, and I learned all this history, and then I went up to Fairview Cemetery, and I go, wait a minute, the DeVoles are here, and Amelia's here. I just had to laugh, because what are the odds that people who lived across the alley from each other would be buried across a road from each other?
Right.
Thank you for watching episode 1 of the Rebel Podcast Adventure Travel Series.